My name is Eddie Walker. In the past, I was known as Thumper from 9-7 East Coast Crips. A lot of people could tell you a lot of things that I used to do bad, but there are a lot of things that people could tell you that I used to do that were good. As a matter of fact, and I could say that many people that knew me probably couldn't tell you one thing that I had done wrong to them. There was just something about growing up in a neighborhood where I looked at people differently than the way they looked at it with me. Because when you don't have a family, your neighborhood becomes your family. But one thing that people didn't know about me was my spiritual side. Most people in the streets don't talk about those things. But one thing about growing up in the hood is that most of us went to church together. That would be around when we were 10, 11 years old. But my spiritual side goes back a little further than that. And people would be quite shocked to understand some of the experiences that I did have. To start from the beginning, my mother and father were both alcoholics. We had a very bad problem in our family with alcohol. It wouldn't, you know, register until I had grown up and looked back upon that era to see the things that our people were going through to understand why they probably drank as much as they did. But because of the alcohol, many family fights started, and I and my brother Timothy ended up in a foster home. In this foster home, Mrs. Alberta Thomas, she was a Jehovah's Witness, very strict. And for me, it would probably be the best experience that I would ever have. Even though today I am not a Jehovah's Witness, I do give Miss Thomas the credit for introducing me to the belief that there was a God. And I will admit that the God of the Jehovah's Witnesses is no different than the God of the Christians, no different than the God of the Jews or the God of the Muslims. I learned over the years that it's the propaganda that many political figures have with these super religious leaders that push these messages to divide people to make them believe that they don't believe in the same God. And it's just simply not true. But for me, Miss Thomas would take us to these conventions out at Hollywood Racetrack. And I was so fascinated by the stand-up performances with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and how they would show them being thrown in the fire. And I mean, for me, I would look at this as like a child would cartoons, and they would always take us to the Kingdom Hall, and we would see videos and these images of people living in the Middle East with you know the head coverings and the especially with the Virgin Mary, and the images of Christ. And it for me, it was like a fairy tale to the young mind of a child. And that is so important because once you ingrain this in the mind of a child, it's almost impossible for them to ever let it go. So while I was in the foster home with Miss Thomas, we went out and we, spoke to people, went door to door and things like that. And it gave me a view of the things that I was reading about. When you read how, the Israelites were treated, for disobeying, and, the customs that they had to keep, and, their laws, and how they, who they should marry, and all of these things, it made so much sense. But then once I left the Jehovah's Witness home and I went to stay with my grandparents, there was absolutely no family functioning like it was in the foster home. But I learned a great deal from my grandmother. There's a lot that I don't like about the relationship I have with my grandmother, but one thing that I can say is that she added to what I learned in Miss Thomas's house by what I would observe her doing. I was fascinated with my grandmother, and a lot of people won't tell you some of the stories that I'm about to tell you. When I came home and I was staying with my grandmother, I always would stare at her, and I would notice that I kind of looked like her. And she was 43 years old at the time. And I used to ask her those questions. Grandma, how old are you? I would tell her, oh, you're so pretty. And I was so grateful for the home cooked meals that she would provide that, I started to get real fat and everything. But I would notice that when she would be by herself, she would be talking to the Lord as if he's standing next to her, like, in a very respectful way, but it's almost as if it was a friend. And I would just sit around corners and I would listen to her. And because I didn't know how to express myself to other people, what she said was what I was feeling. And when I was away from her and I would be walking to school or something like that, and I noticed that a lot of my behavior was starting to reflect some of the young homies that I was hanging around with since junior high. I mean, no, since elementary school. I would start cursing and, using all type of language. And then everything about my belief would kick in. And I would think about things that Miss Thomas told me. I would think about things that I would hear my grandmother say. And I would make these agreements that I would try to watch my language. So this religious belief of knowing right from wrong was influencing a lot of my acts that prevented me from becoming like a lot of my other young homies that were in juvenile hall every other 4 or 5 months, it seems. And what was so strange about it is that I started having spiritual experiences. The youngest one that I can remember when I was about 4, and I was sitting in my grandmother's house on West Boulevard, and I was staring at the corner. For some reason, I was fascinated about staring at stuff. I wanted to know about it. And a dark figure, very tall, almost to the ceiling, in a transparent make, he walked towards me. I couldn't make out a face or anything like that because it was like a shadow with the human form. And he walked right past me, whereas a wind followed him. And I never forgot that. So as I would go on, exploring stuff, I was very, nosy. I wanted to know why things were certain ways and things like that. I started having these things where I was afraid of the dark because I felt as if there was something in there. I knew it was. And this is why I don't make fun of children, especially who sense these things, because their senses are so innocent at that age. What they sense and what they feel is real. It's only the grown-ups who tell them that these things don't exist because they've lost their way. So I would sleep with my head under the blanket. And when I would sleep, I would be afraid to sleep with my head upward, so I would sleep on my stomach. And on several occasions, something would sit on my back and it would paralyze me, and I would only be able to open my eyes and not be able to do anything. So once it left, I didn't know how to deal with this, and I never really told anyone. So as I started to grow up, get a little older, those experiences didn't happen anymore. But the thing about something sitting on me happened again. And one time I was at my cousin Joanne's house and I was sleeping on the sofa in the living room, and there was no window open or anything like that. Something came and it caressed me, as if, it knew me, and something like a mother would do. And it scared me, but for some reason I always felt as if there was something good and something bad that was trying to, you know, pull me in a different direction. But I do say that I was grateful for the introduction at Miss Thomas's house, because under no circumstances did I think I was ever weak enough to outright abandon the belief that there was a God. Another thing that happened is when I was staying with my grandmother and I was going to school, I was starting to get into a lot of just crazy stuff after my brother died. My brother Timothy was electrocuted on March the 25th, 1981. At that time, he was really my everything. And to this day, I can't really speak much about him at length because that's how much I missed him. I think I miss him more than I did my mom, my dad, or anyone, because for a great period of my early life, he was all that was there for me. Everyone else was drinking. So I met my first girlfriend, and I was torn between her and the hood. Me and her would go to church, and I think that's what kind of allowed her to have as much influence as the hood was having on me, to where this was becoming a problem. And one day I was hanging around in the hood, and I was getting up and getting caught up in so much stuff. You name it, I was involved in it. That one day I was at a bus stop because my card broke, and I was going to pick up my check, and I had a radio. And this lady came up to me, and she was wearing an all white dress, sort of like a one-piece gown. She had very dark hair. Her skin, it didn't have no type of reflection, but she didn't seem evil. She was pleasant. And she asked me by my name. She said, "Is your name Eddie?" And I looked up at her as if, she probably knew me from work, or I left something, or, something like that. And I said, "Yeah." And she told me that the Lord said that the Lord had a message for me. And she said to leave your friends alone, because in a time to come, they're going to put you in a trap and plot to kill you. And I was shocked because she knew about my life. And as the bus was coming, I got on and I sat right there by the bus driver. Normally I go to the back of the bus, but she told me this, it freaked me out. And she went all the way to the back of the bus. The bus had already started to pull off when she was standing right in that aisle where you would go down to get off the bus. But she didn't get off the bus. And when I looked back up at her again, like to, really see if this is really happening, she was gone. And this was something that spooked me so much that when I went home, I told that to my grandmother. And my grandmother, she gets hysterical over spiritual things like that. And she told me, "Haven't I been telling you? I've been trying to tell you over and over and over again to stop doing this and stop doing that." And so I said, "Oh, okay." And so what I did, I stopped hanging around for a while. In fact, the LAPD